Good evening. I'm Councillor Carly Gaston, Mayor of the City of Warrnambool, and I'm here to welcome you all this evening and thank you all for coming along to tonight's briefing. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome Uncle Lockie Eccles and Uncle Rob Lowe Sr. to come and give the welcome to country.
Nyechang, Pirang Kuti, Watapakakai. What I just said there, good evening, brothers and sisters. Nyata Nyatu, Nyata Linyong, Uncle Lockie Pa, Uncle Robert Lau. What we're going to do, I'll do it in language, the welcome to country, and then I pass it over to Uncle Robert. Nyarawa, team, ba mereng yo. Nyaye maya pa wan yu, ma pemenil. Alamin, kuraki pa nyapun. Madnarao, watama kuraki nyapun pa nyaraki tong. Nyarawa, nyiti mereng nya.
Thanks, Lockie. You notice Lockie reads off an iPad. His memory's not too good. But first, let us all acknowledge and pay our respects to all our neighbouring tribes in this area, which are Kerichamara, Chaparong, Kunkopanut, Karairong, Yowich. But tonight, we all meet on the traditional land of my people, Pikarong people. Past and present. Well, look, thank you.
Thank you, Uncle Lockie and Uncle Rob. It's wonderful to hear your language. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which we stand and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I acknowledge my fellow councillors here this evening, Councillor David Owen, Councillor Robert Anderson, Councillor Tony Herbert, Councillor Michael Neo, Councillor Sue Cassidy, and also the Mayor of Moyne Shire, Councillor Jim Dukas. Tonight, we're all here united as community members and interested in our future. This council is committed to having a shared long-term vision for Warrnambool. That's why we've commenced the development of a community plan, Warrnambool 2040, which will build a vision, identify our community's priorities and set goals for the coming decades. Whilst this is a long-term plan, that doesn't mean that work can't start now. The community plan will inform our council plan, the review of the Warrnambool Health and Wellbeing Plan, and the development of the new active Warrnambool strategy. It will also influence the work of other local organisations and provide a really strong basis for advocacy to state and federal government. I'm very pleased tonight to report that our community is clearly passionate about Warrnambool's future. With around 2,000 people directly inputting to the Warrnambool 2040 process so far, we have been overwhelmed by the level of response from residents of Warrnambool and indeed the Southwest. Tonight, we're all keen to hear from Amy and Neve from Kapia, who are members of the consultant team, who have read each and every word of the responses. They have analysed the community's comments to give us a sense of their strongest priorities and the key issues which have been raised for Warrnambool's future. The attendance at this briefing is also a really strong reflection on the level of interest in the future of our city. In addition to the 80 or so people here at the Surf Club tonight, around 30 people also submitted formal apologies, many expressing disappointment for whatever reason that they were unable to join us to hear what we have learned firsthand. So, as you may have noticed, we are videoing tonight's presentation, and this will be available to watch, along with a summary of the findings on the W2040 website, just in the coming days. And for those of you who are interested, and I'm sure many of you will be, a more detailed report on the learnings from the process will be available later this month. So without any further ado, I'd like now to hand over to Amy and Neve from Kapia to present their findings to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having Amy and I here this evening. We're really excited to be back in Warrnambool. Amy and I are from a consulting firm in Carlton. We're called Kapia. We've been around for about 10 years, and we do a lot of work in local government and communities across metropolitan Melbourne and Victoria. We've been working on a range of other council plans, and we've been working with Lisa and the team at Warrnambool since the start of this year. So with working with them, we've designed a community engagement strategy, and we're working now to understand what you've all said. As we've heard, there's been an overwhelming response, and I'm really excited to share some of that with you this evening. So most of you should have an agenda. You'll be hearing a bit from me about the presentation, and you're welcome to ask questions as I go along. I'll do my best to answer them. If I can't, Amy will assist me by noting them on the whiteboard, and I'll try and get back to them at the end of this evening. After my presentation, Amy and I will have a bit of a Q&A session first, and then we'll open up to the wider group. And we're really happy to take questions and unpack anything that I share with you this evening. So just before I get into it, I'd just like to get a feel of who's joining us this evening. So if you're from a sporting club, would you mind putting your hand up? Excellent. If you're a local business owner? Great. Thank you. Who's here from council? Excellent. And anyone from state government? Excellent, thank you. Anyone joining us from our neighbouring council, Moyne? Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Great. I'll just run you through how I'll unpack this evening's findings. So before getting into the engagement findings, it's important to reflect on the process. So we'll just recap on what is the W2040 project and how we engaged. A key part of the success of the engagement was the promotion, and I'll share with you how that unfolded. And then I'll explain and learn a bit about who participated in this process before really unpacking what we've heard. So as we've heard already, W2040 is a community plan for the next 20 years that will create a vision, identify priorities and goals for the city through an extensive community-led process. The plan, as you may see on the fact sheets, is made up of 4 themes: environment, people, place and economy. The fact sheets in front of you are a summary of the engagement findings to date. As we've heard, we've had overwhelming responses, nearly 1,300 long-form surveys, and they were made up of 27 questions, and we're still unpacking that, but we're basically 90% through. Today we were able to share with Council some of the findings, so you're hearing it next. When we were designing the engagement, we set out a few objectives, and these were agreed across council. And I won't go through all of them, but I just wanted to touch on some of the key objectives for the engagement. So as part of the process, we will engage the community on trends, issues and opportunities for the future. Build an understanding of the community's needs, aspirations and expectations to 2040. Develop a Warrnambool 2040 vision, goals, priorities and actions. And identify priorities to inform the next iteration of the council plan. So we've just completed phase 1 of the community engagement, and we're in a really good position now with the information that we've received from the community to start planning for the next phase. And I'm going to get into that a little bit, but first, how did we engage? Before I start, who participated in Active Hub? Excellent. Who submitted via a long form survey? Amazing, almost all of the room. That's pretty incredible. I don't think, Amy, have you ever seen as many hands go up in a report back? No. Did anyone complete the short form survey, Wish for Warrnambool? Yeah, excellent. And from our stakeholder groups, did anyone complete one of the conversation toolkits? Excellent. That's great. In addition to the survey and our face-to-face activities, we had Facebook, but also the W2040 website, and that received over nearly 4,500 page views, which is again really great. And of those 4,500, nearly 2,500 were individual unique visits, which is just something really important to highlight. So in promoting the project, Council worked really hard on this, and one of the main ways of promoting the project was our big letters you see behind us, and that's been a real strength in the engagement. And with the engagement findings through the surveys, it's given us quite a bit of confidence in what we've heard. It might not be a statistically valid sample, but it's quite representative of the community, and I think we'll be able to unpack that if there's other things you'd like to know further this evening. So in terms of our participants, again, as we've said, we've had nearly over 2,000 people. And I'm going to talk about the people who completed the long survey because we were able to get quite a good amount of information. So in terms of the regions that make up Warrnambool, there was a pretty good spread from most of the central regions and then from the north, east, southeast Hopkins area and in the west. There was lower participation from the outer areas, but still a reasonable amount. In terms of the age groups, it was quite a young cohort who completed a survey. So the highest amount were completed by those aged from 35 to 49, followed by those under 17 years old. So our future leaders are having a say, which is really important. And then the second highest age group was those between 25 to 34. Interestingly, over half of the surveys were completed by females. So when we were designing our engagement about Warrnambool 2040, and thinking about the future and thinking about a 25-year horizon, it's really important that we reflect upon now. So what we asked people was to think about what do they love, what would they like to keep, and what would they like to change. So I'm going to unpack a bit of what was shared with us, and then I'll go into what people had, what their ideas and priorities for the future were. So when people answer the question, what is the one thing you love about Warrnambool and what are the three things about Warrnambool you would definitely like to keep, the focus on our answers was about Warrnambool as a place. And this included the feel, the appearance, public spaces and the activities, as well as access to services. A higher level of comments also referred to the natural environment, the people and Warrnambool's economy and opportunities. So I'll just go a little bit deeper with them. So in terms of the place, the beach was one of the overwhelming responses that came first. In terms of the beach, things that people loved or wanted to keep, or the areas of discussion was about maintenance, and also some issues or discussion about the different types of uses that occur on the beach. When talking about open spaces, Lake Pretobe, the Botanic Gardens and Flagstaff Hill were frequently mentioned. And what the community want to say is that these spaces are kept as community spaces and that they're available for activities. And this was across the different age cohorts in our survey. Lake Pretobe, interesting, featured more highly in the younger surveys and older respondents. So, different types of uses occurring. One of the things that also was mentioned highly was the walking and cycling trails that connect Warrnambool and the ease of getting around and being able to explore the natural environment. Another key thing that came up about what people love is the sporting opportunities, and that's something that people would like to see maintained, in particular the access to sporting grounds, facilities and clubs. Of the sports that were talked about, football was one of the highest mentioned, but other respondents talked about just the sheer availability of other sports to participate in. So in terms of people and the community and how people feel, many respondents said that they love and want to keep the existing community spirit in Warrnambool, and that they feel, and one of the things they love is a strong sense of community and friendliness. In terms of Warrnambool's character and culture, it's highly valued and is something to be kept. When talking about the culture or the character of Warrnambool, people talked often about the country town feel, or its coastal vibe was another key term that came up. People love the peace and quiet and the small size of Warrnambool. And in terms of culture, people would like to see the arts community, art gallery and lighthouse theatre going. And this was particularly mentioned with people of working age around the arts and culture. So, in terms of the economy, the thing that people talked about and what they want to keep is education opportunities, particularly through Deakin University and the Southwest Institute of TAFE. So now we're going to have a bit of look into what people would like to change. So people asked the question, what would you like to change? And the first issue, or one of the issues that had the highest responses and discussion, was access to health services. And when talking about health services, it was about the locations, so wanting to see more health services located outside of central Warrnambool, the affordability of those services, dental and access to more bulk billing clinics came up. The other thing that was related to health was access to mental health services, and this was an issue that came up in several of the questions, and it came up in a lot of the responses for younger people. Following on from the third kind of main issue, or highly talked about issue, was about the current use of illicit drugs and alcohol consumption in the community. And there was some really strong language in how people would like to see this to change. So many respondents want the use of drugs and alcohol consumption to be reduced considerably. And then there is a real call for a crackdown on illicit drug use and the change in current drinking culture, and supporting this through more mental health awareness and support. So. The environment was another area when discussing change, but what people would like to see is the protection and the preservation of the natural environment, and really suggesting a return to more native types of vegetation, and suggesting that if there's replanting of trees and species, that they be native. So in terms of the economy and where people would like to see change is a more diverse offering of job opportunities. And in particular, people were asking for more employment opportunities to support younger people to remain in Warrnambool. Education was another area for change, and what came through was the current, or the sentiment of uncertainty about the university, and wanting to see a greater diversity in offering of university and TAFE courses. And finally, the other area where people would like to see a bit more change is around transport infrastructure. So looking at the way we move around the city, both in our car, but also through walking and cycling paths. So there was a bit of a call for greater connectivity with walking and cycling paths, as well as access to public transport. I'm now going to move on to the future. So we've divided this part of the briefing based on our 4 themes. So I'm going to start with place. So with each of the 4 themes, you'll see in the fact sheets, we've come up with some priorities. So I'm going to provide my report back based on the priorities in the fact sheet. So one of the first ones for Place is access to and provision of community facilities and recreation facilities. This included support for community-based recreation groups, recreation facilities targeted at different ages and users, including playgrounds, exercise equipment, dog parks, and more opportunities for indoor informal recreation. In addition, was wanting to see more sporting ovals and croups, outdoor courts with lighting for informal use, and upgrading and developing new indoor sporting facilities, school partnerships to encourage young people to be involved in sport. As part of our analysis of the survey findings, we were able to look back to a 2013 survey where there was quite comparable information. So throughout the next part of my presentation, where I can, I'll draw back and I'll show you where there's been a bit of change. So one of the things in talking about access to sporting facilities is that people generally feel there's really good access to sporting facilities, and there's only been a slight reduction in perception of change to sporting facilities since 2013. But when thinking about cultural and arts facilities and activities, in comparing 2013 to today, people feel that there's been a decrease in access. So just something to think about. So with each of these priorities, they will help shape the discussion for the next phase of the engagement. So our next priority is enhancing the road network, including connectivity in public transport, as well as providing more walking and cycling paths. When, again, comparing to 2013, we found that the community feel, or our respondents feel, that there is a decrease in access to walking and cycling infrastructure. But when asked about people's access to local facilities within walking distance to their local area, generally people said it was pretty good. So over 60% of people had a positive or high levels of agreement that it was quite good. So you'll hear when I'm unpacking this, there might be some tensions, or it might seem like I'm contradicting myself, but it's just that there's differing views. So this is very much part of the phase one and unpacking different views. So our fourth priority for Place is protecting and acknowledging Warrnambool heritage, including Aboriginal heritage, historic buildings and facades. This included maintaining the city's regional and country character, and as well as enhancing the CBD as a vibrant and bustling coastal town to enhance and support the arts, culture and Warrnambool as a family-friendly city. So now I'm going to talk about people and our Warrnambool community. We asked a lot of different questions to understand how people feel and how they feel about feel connected or part of the community. And I think this might be quite an interesting part of the presentation. So when we look back from 2013 to today, looking at the question, I have friends and family who could help out if I need it, there was a strong level of agreement that people feel they can call their friends or family and they'll get help when they need it. But when we looked at the question around how well do I know my neighbour, this has actually decreased. So in 2013, 76% of respondents said they knew their neighbours, whereas this year it's actually 57%. So again, just something to think about. The other question that we also looked back on is perceptions around, or how people feel how inclusive Warrnambool is, and 50% of respondents strongly agreed that people in Warrnambool are accepting of people of different ethnic cultures, religious backgrounds and sexual orientation. Another measure that looks at community connectivity is volunteering rates, and this is one that I just wanted to draw out as well because this hasn't changed since 2013, and 85% of participants agree that there are opportunities to volunteer in Warrnambool. So I think that's a really positive sign of something that's remained the same. So our third one for community is promoting a healthier, active and safer community. So with high quality infrastructure to support healthy lifestyles and promote physical exercise, decrease illicit drug use, lower alcohol consumption, lower crime and reduce family violence with more restrictions on cigarette smoking. So creating a healthier environment and culture for adolescents was also discussed as a priority. When asking questions about levels of access to health services, this is actually in most areas saw an increase since 2013, with most areas, with the exception of services available to keep older people in their own homes. When looking down the other end at younger people, and particularly for maternal child health services, there's been an increase or a perceived increase of access to services from 2013. Our other priority for our community is improved healthcare and greater access to mental health services. So improve healthcare and access to quality facilities and improvement access to mental health services and healthcare that supports an ageing population. So one of the other questions that we asked through the survey was the big issue, and I'm just going to pull out a couple of things from that because I think that's an important thing to share with you. So our question is, the one thing that worries you most about your own health and well-being. Interestingly, what hasn't changed, and they're still equal first, is work-life balance. So similar response from 2013. The second one was weight, and that has increased slightly since 2013, followed by mental health and lack of physical activity. So just something to think about when we're talking about community connectedness, feelings of and health, to keep in the back of our minds. So when thinking about the environment, one of the priorities that came through was the preservation and maintenance of the existing natural environment, and this included the cleanliness and safety of the natural environment, protection of wildlife, recognition of the environment's importance, increased care and responsibility by the community. Our second one for environment was increased greenery across the city, and this included nature strips, publicly edible gardens, more green spaces and parks, more street trees, more native plants, and an increase in green links connecting people to nature. Our third environmental priority is improve community environmental awareness. People would like to see that the community is more conscious of their impacts on the environment, and including climate change. And there's a bit of an aspiration here. People would like to see Warrnambool recognised as an environmentally sustainable city, and that the community should be a part of this. Our fourth environmental priority is for Warrnambool to decrease its impact on the environment. Again, pushing for greater change in transition to renewable energy by reducing pollution, reducing waste, increasing recycling, increasing sustainable transport use, and to promote innovation and adoption of technologies that reduce impacts on the environment. Another point that I'd like to compare from 2013 to this year's survey findings is there was actually a decrease of 40% in community sentiments about efforts to protect the natural environment. So, again. So our final area is the economy. Our priorities here are to be a leader in food production and food tourism, to encourage the growth of Warrnambool to thrive and embrace the future. And our third one is encourage innovation and development of new industries. So plan an innovative and income-producing project to create a vibrant city that welcomes, encourages and rewards innovation. So our last priority for economy is to meet the needs of the expanding population with education and employment opportunities. The community would like to see a Warrnambool that attracts more people to live and work in the city with infrastructure and jobs available, for Warrnambool to be a more contemporary city and to be a well-connected hub. Provision of educational opportunities from birth to tertiary, have high quality university, TAFE and schools. improve job opportunities with more diversity of employment, with more jobs to retain younger people and attract more industries. This is a strong area of importance for community and was evident throughout the survey findings from all ages. Just again, looking back to 2013 and access to education, there's for each type of education, there's a community view that there's less access available. And key issues relating to this again are about the diversity of course offerings at Deakin and TAFE, but also thinking about older people in our community and access to mature age learning opportunities. Before I finish and we open it up for a bit of discussion, there's just one quote that I'd like to share with you, and I think it'll set the scene for our next phase. And this is one of, and it could be a community member in this room, but someone's wish for Warrnambool in 2040. My wish for Warrnambool is that in 2017, Council laid the foundation for our great-grandchildren to be proud of us. Don't be afraid to make the tough choices due to political cycles. So, thank you. I'm now going to invite Amy up, and we're going to have a bit of a Q&A, and then we'll open it up to you.
And I would just like to acknowledge the juggle that Niamh had to do in that presentation between microphone and clicker and speaking notes and presentation and survey results. So thank you, Niamh. I've got some questions for Niamh. I put the hat on of your diverse community, and listening to that presentation, I'm going to put you in the hot seat. I'm going to stand up for this, Niamh, but you can take a seat because you've been standing for a while. So if I was a local community member, and I was 18 and I'm finishing school at the end of the year, what do you think my priorities are? Like what's the results from the engagement saying about my priorities? I'm 18, I'm finishing high school at the end of 2017.
I'm 18 and finishing high school. I think I'll be thinking about the future and I'll be looking about what type of job, and I think the big question that I would have if I was 18 and living in Warrnambool is, do I stay or do I go? So what are my choices here in terms of education, and is there a pathway for me afterwards to work in a job that I want to work in? So yes, that's some of the kind of the feedback coming out of the survey. So,
yeah. And to move the hat over, how about if I was a newly arrived migrant and I'd arrived in Warrnambool because of employment opportunities? What would be my priority for the future?
So we specifically did seek out some migrant feedback, and that was looking at a particular workforce base. And I might not talk about in terms of employment, I might talk about it as an aspiration to become a community member here. One of the things that's really strong about the Warrnambool community, as I mentioned, was the sense of spirit and friendliness. But what came through in the data is that if you've arrived in Warrnambool within the last 5 years, it's actually a challenging community to crack in and feel integrated with. But the flip side of that is there's a big drive for Warrnambool to be diverse and inclusive. So as a newly arrived community member, I think my goal would to find my place in the community and look at how I can participate in community life. So.
One microphone, it's the speaking stick. Okay, the final hat, and then I've got some other things to present to you. What about if I'm a person with a disability? So what is the survey data or the engagement information saying about people with disabilities that live in the Warrnambool community and their priorities?
That will come back to the way in which we move around Warrnambool and how it's connected in terms of its walking and cycling paths. So I think the way in which we move around, but also the other thing that came through was about learning opportunities and mature age learning opportunities. So that would be another area. Not specifically about services.
So then there is a lot of information that's come through these 2,000 people participating in this engagement. So it presents a whole lot of challenges for council about the future and how they plan for the future of the community. So Niamh, the knowledge bank of Warrnambool. She has read tens of thousands of pages of input from your community. That's why she's looking slightly fatigued. No, I'm joking. What are the 4 big tensions for council? Okay.
I'm going to start again with the one I raised about being welcoming and connected versus inclusive, and I think that that's something that should be carried forward into the next phase of engagement and unpacked, because if there's sections of the community that don't feel that they are included or have as much opportunity to participate in community life, I think that's really important, because W2040 is a community-led plan with community priorities, so it needs to be reflective of as much of the community as it can. So that's probably one of the first ones. The second one that you might have heard is about growth and change. So really Warrnambool's character. So what some of the things that I talked about was that people really like the small town feel and the coastal country vibe. But then also we've heard a call for growth and bringing in new industries. So with more jobs and growth, that means more people. So thinking about what the future of Warrnambool looks like, its size. The third one I would say as well is around transport, and we unpacked this a little bit today about, we heard earlier that people love the walking and cycling trails, but the distribution of that across Warrnambool as a whole municipality may not be as well serviced in some areas. So I think, again, one of the areas is looking about equity of access to a couple of things around the city, and walking and cycling paths certainly came through. Probably the other one that I really think about is the economy and the types of jobs for the future, and ensuring that we're skilling up and providing the right course offerings to match those future jobs. And I think that's a key part of embracing change. And there's been a big push through the survey findings, which we shared with councillors, to be bold about change and talk about change. So, yep.
I think that's probably enough questions from me, and we're going to open to the floor, to the participants tonight, if you have any questions for Niamh. Just because we do only have one microphone, if you have a question, just put your hand up. I'll facilitate the process. I'll get you to ask your question. Niamh will have the microphone, so she'll repeat the question and then she'll respond to the question as well. So Niamh doesn't have all the answers, but she has been leading the analysis team in terms of reading and reviewing and analysing all the information that's come into us as the independent listeners in this process. So not all the answers, but most of the answers. If we don't have the answer, I'll document them on the whiteboard behind me, and we'll do some data mining to find the answer for you if we have it at hand. So,
first question.
I want to draw everyone's attention to the illicit drug use. Were the respondents focusing on just stopping drug use, or were they saying more about the causes of drug use?
It was more, sorry, I'll just repeat Toby's question. Toby, I'm just jumping if I get this wrong. So was it more about the drivers for illicit drug use or the causes? So in terms of what came out was actually more about the outcomes of illicit drug use and the impact that that has on family and community, and safety was another thing. So ice was one of the mentioned drugs that came through. So, yeah. Does that answer your... Okay, and our next question over this way.
Sorry,
yep.
I might have missed it at the start. When you talked about, and you're comparing data from 2013 to 2017, and you did talk about the demographics of 17 survey. How did the demographics then compare with 13's?
Okay, so the question is comparing the demographic information, so looking at ages, locations, between 2013 and 2017. We actually focus more on the answers, so I can definitely do that and look at the participation. So I'll take that one on notice and I'll get Amy to document it. So, yeah. Hi, David.
You mentioned 2013 in terms of environmental importance. Am I right to believe that you said there was 40% less interest in it?
No, so it was more that people thought that there was less efforts being made to preserve the environment.
Less effort?
Yeah.
And what was their interpretation of global warming?
We actually, I might have to take that one on notice as well because,
Thank you. Less effort?
Yes,
Yeah,
so...
it came across as like less interest.
No, there's a high level of interest to be actively involved in improving environmental outcomes, and climate change wasn't questioned. I think it was, it's okay.
So you mentioned that there was less access to arts and culture.
Yeah.
Was there a sense from the respondents whether that there was less opportunity, or was there greater demand or appetite for arts and cultural experiences so that there was unmet need?
Yeah. So just to rephrase the question, so it was about the statement around less access to arts and cultural facilities. So the question is there higher demand, and is that not meeting the provision of what's available? I would actually need to look into that one because from what we've looked at, it's just more about perceived levels of access. And I'll just say perceived because that's the respondent's view. So whether it's a real representation of what's available and people's levels of access, have to unpack. But Lisa, would you have anything to add from that one? Or just...
It would probably be my opinion rather than unpacking the data. So
okay.
So that.
We'll come back and we'll make sure that that's one of the questions. Yep, Tom?
Given the fact that you've done a fair body of work, obviously with quite a few councils over throughout Victoria, what are some of the major elements that might be individual to Warrnambool that seems to come through that may not be sort of transposed through some of the other municipalities?
Oh, that's a really great question. So the question, was about what's come through from the data that's quite unique to Warrnambool in comparison to other strategies around community plans for other municipalities. To be honest, I'm going to say I can't think of one right now. You've got one?
So we have been doing the community and council plan for, is it Victoria's largest population, that council. I don't need to mention it by name. And some others. The difference that I see in the data is around social inclusion, accessibility, breaking down barriers between community. This is a very welcoming community. You want to know your neighbours. That, even though there's been a drop of people actually knowing their neighbours, there's this underlying tone of kind of cohesion here. In other areas, community members and councillors are very explicit about not being a welcoming place, which I find really interesting and quite disturbing, but we are independent listeners in this process. That's my big take home from the process. That's it.
Hi there.
So following on from that, so we just said what was different, but what about what was the same? How did we compare in terms of statistics that can be compared with other regional councils?
I can't tell you about statistically, but I can tell you from a theme base. So particularly regional councils, one is definitely about diversifying job opportunities and looking at attracting new industry or looking at innovation with our existing industries to be leaders. So that's probably one. Education, access to further learning, having the offerings as well, that's probably another one. The issue around identity and growth, that tension, that's quite a common theme and that also occurs within metropolitan councils in Melbourne about, we want to retain our village feel, but we need to grow, or we need to meet the needs of our growing population. Amy, would you have... transport's a really common one, and particularly in regional councils as well, around footpath and like the connectedness of all footpaths, and cycling paths would be something that we've heard quite frequently. So, yep. For me, the unexpected one was about it's the one that I've raised a couple of times, is about people, the really strong drivers. Amy mentioned to be a diverse and inclusive community, but then hearing the drop in people knowing their neighbours and other people not feeling as connected if they've newly arrived, like that. I just found that's a bit surprising, but yeah.
Oh, hi. I'm interested to know how we compare with other councils with the community uptake of the actual survey.
Yep.
I'm actually new to Warrnambool. But on the surface, I would say a sample of what 2,000 people have responded is actually quite low. What's your opinion?
I'm going to go with the opposite and say it's actually really high. We were really pleasantly surprised. We were reflecting this morning. Amy said she's worked on over 300 local government projects, and this is the highest level of participation from a survey, particularly a survey that's got 27 questions. And when looking at each of the individual responses, nearly every question had around 1,000 responses. So it's really quite high. And I think even within metropolitan councils, I can't think of a process recently where we've had over 1,000 long-form survey responses.
Even state significant projects, say the renewal of the Queen Victoria Market, which you might know in the city of Melbourne, we've been working on that. We don't see anywhere near numbers like this. So it's a testament to the passion and the commitment and the connectedness in the community. It's also a reflection of a really great process where there was a lot of awareness and it kind of snowballed. But because it's survey-based engagement, it means that the information that we have about where the community is and where the community is going is very rich, it's very deep. A lot of engagement is, it might be very wide in terms of participation, but you don't get the depth. So it's quite an incredible situation that you've got this pool of data that will not only inform your community plan, but a whole lot of other plans. It's quite remarkable.
It's literally taken 7 weeks to analyse all of this information, and I've had about 6 people in the office helping me, so it's been huge. Yep. Down the back.
I'd just like to ask in particular about one of the comments you made was improved healthcare and greater access to mental health services, and I just find it interesting that out of improved healthcare, you highlighted greater access to mental health services. Can you tell me if that was perhaps the most common response out of all healthcare in terms of we want greater access to mental health services? And then I'm not sure if from the data, if you further unpack that, were people saying that they couldn't seek help when they first needed help for mental health issues? Also, from those mental health issues, were people perhaps saying that we have a link to, greater, use of ice in the community as a result of that, or what were some of the, on-flow effects? If you get anything from the survey in relation to that, because that seems to come up as one of the things we need to.
Yep. So the questions relating about what people were saying when they were asking for greater access to mental health services and maybe some of the links with illicit drug use. So in terms of the survey findings, we probably didn't unpack it to the depth that you've asked, but we can look back in and see a bit further. But one of the things that did come through was about information about services available, so maybe not being as aware of what's available to them. But it came through from people aged between 25 and 59, so that's it's quite interesting in itself. And I kind of can't unpack it any further at this point, but we will look into that as part of the next bit of reporting. So. And I would definitely say that that's something to carry over into the second phase of engagement.
So out of all the health issues, can you say whether that was the number one or not really? Or
it is a really key priority. Actually, I can just...
She's got the data.
The cheat sheet. It was. So the question was, when asked about what most concerned themselves, their friends or family regarding their health and well-being, mental health was the highest issue listed. So thinking about ourselves but also the wider community. So, yeah. So I think that's a strong call to action out of that one. Yep. Next question. Yep, thank you.
I really like the question that you asked earlier about if you're an 18-year-old person just finishing school or about to finish school, what do you think of? I like to flip it around and ask if you're the parent of a person who's just about to finish school, what are they thinking? Because I think there's far-reaching effects of that has effects on academics.
Yep. I'd actually say it's quite a similar response in terms of, but also looking at it from a parent's perspective, do my children need to go away in order to attain the education that they need to pursue a job that they're interested in? So that's kind of how I would read it. And what was really clear was people pushing for greater diversity and choices to keep younger people here. So does that give you a...
Yep, yeah, I think, yes, I was sort of more also thinking about the effects of families making that decision. Can they afford to do it? Can't they afford to do it? If they afford to do it, do they, mum and dad both have to work or whatever, and then the effects of that on other members of the family or whatever else when that happens, because it's a costly exercise, I suppose.
Yep.
Or if you can't afford to send your child somewhere, the effects that has on their education and therefore the community and abroad.
Yep.
I think it's really relevant.
Yep. Definitely something, again, to think about. Next step. Is that a hand down the back? Yep.
Yeah, no, I just want to know if there was any statistics that you got relating to children that were educated here. They want, or we want, that country lifestyle, yet the children want, or the youth want, education and then a job. And yet at the same time they're probably saying Warrnambool's too dull. So how do we actually keep that country type feel that everybody wants and then increase the employment opportunities? How's that actually attained? Have you actually got any stats on whether the people are prepared to probably sacrifice a bit of that country feel to get that growth and that excitement that the youth want?
So we probably didn't ask it quite in that way, but that narrative has come back in some ways. And when I talked about the economy, I think I kind of raised this as a tension as well about diversifying education to keep young people here. But I think that that's an important part for phase 2. So, and why I'm saying that is that that's actually a community conversation about that tension. I would ask, Amy, I think, is there anything kind of further that's probably one of the areas that as a community probably need to unpack a little bit further and talk about what people are willing to trade off to keep younger people here, or so it wasn't so apparent in that way, but yeah.
That's one of the challenges for council, that trade-off, that, can you have both? Do you have to go one way or the other? What you described, that situation has come through the data, but it's like, well, what next? What do we do? What do we need to do? So that's where the planners and council need to make decisions, and that's part of the community planning process with the community for the community. So, yep.
Just sort of leading on from that, was there any feedback on how Warrnambool, the connectivity of Warrnambool to the outside world? So, for example, if you wanted to be in Warrnambool, but you wanted to be able to, engage in a role, or you want to be able to go to Melbourne and come back, was there any feedback on, how connected Warrnambool is to the outside world in terms of, increasing that diversity and the opportunities while still being able to live here, whether that be through use of technology, and improve things like improved rail services to Melbourne, those sorts of
So it's two parts. So the first part is about transport and connectivity to areas outside of Warrnambool, and yes, that did come up, and particularly around the frequency of V lines to Melbourne. So that's one part, and the second part that you raised is about technology in terms of connecting to the outside world and employment. And that came through in terms of embracing change and about future employment opportunities. So it's supported as something to be looked at. David, did you have a question?
I'm thinking about it.
Okay, David, I can come back. That's all right if you need. Yeah, sure, certainly. Yep.
Did you get a feel for the time frames in which the wishes were put down? So the aim is 2040, but I know a lot of things we're talking about are in the next 1 to 5 years can be improved as well as long term. Is there any breakdown in great ideas for infrastructure, maybe a 5 to 10 or 15 year process? And they're great ideas in 20 years' time, but also things that really will be highlighted as a 1 to 3 year project. Did that sort of come through in a range of information, or was it lopsided to one end or the other?
Just because of the way in which the question was framed, there was more answers that were geared with a longer outlook to 2040. Lisa, you might be able to help me out. We talked about a couple of projects this morning, but certainly things around connectivity, that's a short-term thing. Education offering is short-term. So things around access are short-term, I would suggest. Yep. Oh, yes, sorry, the Lifelong Learning Project at the library was something as well that came through pretty quickly. Yes? I think so. So just to recap, Glenn, for everyone else in the rest of the room, Glenn's point is about we haven't inherited the earth from our parents. We're borrowing it from our children. And I think the last quote that I mentioned was about having a Warrnambool in 2040 that our great-grandchildren can be proud of. So the message from the community, that's to council, but also community members who are involved in the next phase, is think big and have that forward-looking focus. Yeah. David, and then I'll come to Catherine.
Do you want to go first? No, you do. Okay. What can you tell us about spirituality, religion, in that come out of this?
No, I don't think we asked specific questions around...
Just around inclusion and acceptance of diversity. Yeah.
But in terms of wanting to unpack spirituality, the census data is coming out shortly. So, yeah, in September, I think you'll be able to see that. Catherine?
Just curious, we talk about change and thinking big. Was there any absolute endorsements of current activities that are happening they want to see continue?
So the question was around about endorsements of current activities that people would like to see continue. Just thinking around things that people mention around keep. So I'll have to come back to that one because no. So I think in terms of definitely around the natural environment and preserving the natural environment was something that was really strong. I'll have to come back. Yeah. Down the back.
Were there any state or federal issues that the community wanted council to advocate for? Anything that's common to state or federal council?
No, and that's quite interesting because sometimes that comes through. So sometimes we'll get things around stamp duty, stopping migration, nothing like that I can recall. Yep. I think I was...
In the sphere of economic development, given the globalisation, from the responses, was there a sense of what strength or asset or niche might play globally?
There were. So it's the questions around what strengths or assets or niche Warrnambool can play globally for the future economy. And it was around agribusiness and food production. So looking to modernise and innovate in those two areas. Yep. Is there a question this side of the room?
So just from the business perspective, what was the key takeout?
Around business, it was probably more about retail in the local area, and
lack of support or lack
one of the things that was actually raised was that people felt there was a good offering of local shops and types of shops. So there was a bit of comparison between Gateway and what's available in town. So, yeah, but nothing particularly strong from business that I can recall. Yeah, I don't think. No. Yeah. Yeah.
thoughts on infrastructure, like the future, is there much uptake on that at all? Like hospitals, schools, for more schools, you spoke about those bit on sporting recreation, community centres, but more harder topics like schools, hospitals, road infrastructure, stuff.
So the question was around what was raised as ideas kind of for big ticket infrastructure items, and probably schools was one. Hospitals wasn't raised, and I think given the high response throughout access to services, I think that makes sense. Infrastructure around the road network was definitely raised. Also about walking and cycling paths as part of infrastructure. In terms of sporting grounds, it was kind of a bit of a call for more and for a bit of, and more indoor based type sporting facilities, and informal indoor recreation was part of that. Yeah.
Surf club come up?
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, question, Claire.
Just curious with our ageing population, if there was any sort of key information about that comes along.
I think there's what I kind of took from it. There's a bit of worry about how we're going to look after our ageing population in Warrnambool and how we're going to support people to age well in place. And also, as I mentioned, there's some concerns about access to services for older people, and particularly about supporting people in their homes. So, yeah, that came through as a concern. Yes.
The environment and the you were talking about planting more native vegetation.
So the comments were around, so the Norfolk pines were raised. I think there's a bit of debate, was what I kind of took from the findings, but the message was, if you're replanting, look to native species first. And no particular species were mentioned. Yeah.
About the open space side of that. Planting open space and stuff like that.
Nothing like quite particular. So it was just more about open spaces in general, and green spaces on street edges. Yeah. Yes. The message is that that's really encouraged, and that's probably a part of the future story. Yeah. So. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. So the question was around technology and how technology can support more flexible working environments. So people working from home or working in co-working spaces, as well as education. Is that? Yep. And the message from the survey was that community's on board with that, and yeah, something that to be encouraged, and as a way of supporting innovation was the message. Yep.
Do you get a sense of the wider community's sense of value of tourism into Warrnambool, given that it's a major venue
Yep. So the question was, did I get a sense that the community really value tourism as an economic generator for Warrnambool? And yes, I think it's seen as part of Warrnambool's economy, and it's important to it. So, yep. Yes.
Did events come up? Did they highlight?
So the question was, did events come up? Yes. So, and one in particular was Fun for Kids came up. That was something that people liked. And again, I think there's a real appetite for more events, particularly arts and cultural events was a really strong message. Any? Oh, yeah.
You talked a lot about tertiary education.
Yes.
Going back towards schools, was there any level of concern expressed or any strategies suggested to increase the level of education, the proportion, I should say, of secondary school pupils getting through to year 12, which I understand to be quite low in this area?
So the question, right, thank you. So the question is around what was raised in terms of supporting younger people to get through to year 12. One of the things, so in terms of the questions around access to education, so that looked at all levels of education. And one of them was about the diversity of year 12 course offerings, and there's a perception that that's gone down. So if younger people can't do the year 12 courses that they'd like to, that's going to support them into their tertiary education, that may be something that's not supporting, or people may have to move away. So, yep. So it's more around access for education. Yep. David? Welcome. No, I am, because there's only one.
Any discussion around our sister cities? China?
So, sorry, David's question was there any discussion about our sister cities in China and Japan? Yep. Councillor, did you have any questions? Or? Oh, Amy?
How's everyone feeling about all this? There's been a whole lot of information presented to you. It's quite a lot to sort of take on board. How are you feeling? Feeling okay? Any surprises? Any like, oh my, some surprises. Gareth, you had a surprise. What was the surprise?
I'm wondering about who we don't hear from.
Who we don't hear from in the responses.
What the type of things I'd like to hear. I'd like to hear all the people on this like this, but when you're around the water cooler or watching Facebook or watching your responses to the standard, this isn't the kind of thing that we hear. So I'm thinking about who we're not hearing from.
Yep.
Is there a general thing pattern?
Okay. Yeah. So who are we not hearing from? Do you know?
Yes. What you did on your survey, but then, as we've been told, nobody reads the comments that are on Facebook. You go on Facebook, a whole different kettle of fish. You need to take what social media say and what surveys you get and mix them out. I think that's what Jeff was sort of saying. It's what you don't hear, and you're not taking that into consideration to balance the two out.
And tonight we are presenting back on council's engagement process that we've partnered with them on. There are hundreds of Facebook pages out there that mention Warrnambool City Council. As a social scientist, we don't look at that. Okay, we read it, but we don't bring it into the mix with our analysis. This is what we would do is we would direct people from the social media pages into the space where the survey is, so there's consistency in the data that we're gathering, and we can measure it and we can compare it over time, and we have evidence to base our decision making on. But we would hope we can use Facebook to create awareness and create a conversation about the future. But please come over and talk to us. But with the engagement approach, when we designed it up with council, it was about making sure we were going out to people. We weren't hosting meetings on a Tuesday night and inviting people along at 5:30 because that's not accessible to everyone in the community. We went out to where the people were. We sent hard copies. We didn't rely on the fact that everyone has email or has Facebook. We sent hard copies of toolkits, which many of you would have received. We sent hard copy letters. We did interviews and one-on-ones. So a real focus of this engagement was going to the people that we don't hear from, because as we know, we already probably know the opinions of those that we hear from all the time. We need to hear it from the whole community. We also, through the engagement process, at the start, we did mapping of what your community looks like, all the different cohorts, all the different groups, all the different organisations, all the different interests. So what's really important to us in our monitoring and evaluation of the process is making sure all those groups are represented in that survey data, that pool of data as well. We're not at the end of the data yet, but if there are any gaps, we'll be looking to fill it by going out and finding those groups and having those conversations. Yeah. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded. I got into social science head, but yeah. Any other surprises from anyone though? Do you feel okay about where you're at? Yeah. Yep, back of the room.
Sorry, I'd just be interested in a perception more than anything of whether what has been presented tonight in the sense that the residents or citizens that participate in this that we are self-reliant. Are we more self-reliant or dependent, I suppose, to create the future for ourselves? Because I've just seen a number of the things we were talking about, work-life balance, through what we need to do into the future, and some of the responses being what council will need to do. Not only to provide the framework, but is the community, get a sense from those responses that it is a willingness of the community to act and undertake a number of these initiatives themselves. So it's a long question, but it's more perception, because I think if we're dependent and look for others to do it, it won't happen.
I was like, I would go into let the expert.
I would say it's yes and no is the answer, and sorry that's a bit vague. I think there are certainly community members and community groups within your community who are really willing to be part of that change and change for the future. And I keep coming back to phase 2, but I think that's where we'll really unpack that willingness when we look at the priorities and confirming are they the right priorities, because out of those priorities we need to develop a set of objectives, and they need to be real. And one of the things that we talked about was that this plan needs to have a long life. It's not going to be a document that's going to sit on a shelf at council, and the way to achieve that is to have community embracing it and helping and working with council to deliver on the initiatives and the outcomes. So for me, my feeling from reading everything is that there is a willingness from community, but I think it needs to be a discussion first as well. So,
Neve, do you think that the community's more focused on retaining things the way they've always been and not really wanting to embrace change, or is there more of a community feel about moving forward to the future, embracing the fact that we're in a competitive market? Do you get that sort of feedback through the responses?
So the question is about how willing are community to embrace change, and are they, I guess, excited for change, or do they want things to remain as they are? From what I've read, there's a willingness to embrace change and there's a bit of excitement about it. So in other communities, there can be a real fear of change, and we actually have to spend quite a bit of time unpacking why people are afraid of change. And whereas I don't really get the sense that will be a big part of the discussion, I think it'll be more about agreeing what the change is together. So yeah, I think for me it read as we're going to have change, we need change. It was
a lot of older people. It's hard for them to change.
Yes, and that's a pretty fair comment across a lot of communities. So the survey was predominantly completed by younger people. So yes, I would say that's one of the reasons. As I kind of said, I've tried to put a bit of a caveat on that whilst it's not statistically valid, our sample, it's a pretty good representation. So making sure we invite older people to be a part of that discussion will be a really important part of the next phase. Glenn?
More of a statement once again.
Yep.
And that it's not. If you want to see change, promote change, the best way is to change the language that you use about commission. I did a bit of work with chemical communities here. We're talking about homelessness. I'm going to figure out that change the language that's used about homelessness, which then changes the perception, which follows the outcome.
So Glenn's raised a really fair point. So Glenn's kind of message is that when we're talking about change, we need to be really mindful about the language we use in talking about change, and that's a big part of it. And that would be really reflective of my experience in community engagement. When talking about change, people often associate change with loss. And so I think that's a really great point, that, you know, we've got to be really careful about the way we talk about change. It might not always mean we lose something, we might gain a whole lot of things. So, yep. Yes?
So I'm still just a bit confused about that environmental question where you said there was a 40% reduction in people who are satisfied with...
About efforts to preserve the environment. So people feel that there's less efforts to help preserve the environment. So whether that's true, based on what's happening across council or through environmental care groups.
Could it be just the raising of the benchmark?
It could be, and we've got a more embracing environment to talk about environmental change as a state. So that could be another driver. Yep. Is there a question? Yep.
I think it will. I think Council's going to look at all of this really intensely, and it's actually quite interesting that we do have a vision at the moment to be a cosmopolitan city by the sea and be welcoming, and that the community is telling us that that's what they want to be. So, but on every single facet, we're going to take this data and analyse it as much. Of course, this is a community plan, so we want the community to come along with us, and we'll try and engage as best we can in that way.
I might actually bring that slide up because I feel like I'm teasing you a bit in talking about it. So, sorry, that's really small writing, so I'm going to actually read it. So we're actually only very much in the beginning of this discussion. I just really want to emphasise that. And why we've showed an upside down triangle is as we move through each part of the discussion, our focus gets tighter. So phase 1 started in April, finished in June this year. And phase 1 was, again, really wanting to understand what people love, keep, and want to change, and what's people's wish. So that was a really big conversation. In phase 2, we'll start in October. So we'll be looking to come back to the community and confirm some of the priorities that we've heard and check, are they the right ones? And then what's the vision as well? That will be something discussed as part of that, as well as the objectives. So we're actually planning for that this week, and it'll be thinking about a community forum. So as part of that work, that will lead us into a draft community plan. So the draft community plan will come back out to you for engagement in early 2018. We think by then it'll be pretty right. So, and that's a big reason in starting the conversation early. So the foundation of information that we have has set us up for a really great conversation in phase 2. And I've talked about some of the different tensions or different ideas or priorities, and we'll really unpack them further. So Lisa or Amy, is there anything you would like to add about the next steps?
When we go out really wide to the community members, and especially when we have 2,000 people providing their input, sometimes what we get looks a bit like a wish list. It's like, here we are now, and this is what we want in the future. So the challenge for the next phase is to look at, to sift through the wish list. Some things might roll up together as projects or programs and initiatives for council or for some of the community partners. But it's going to be a really important stage to look at trade-offs, because you can't have everything. You can't have everything now. No community can have everything and have everything now. Is it coming in 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, 20 years? Who's providing it? Who's our partners? But yeah, trade-offs will be it's a really important part of that conversation, because whatever the community plan looks like, it needs to reflect, where the community is actually going and what the priorities are for the whole community, not just the loud voices, not just for council, but all the partners as well. So I just wanted to bring in that term trade-offs. So are we going to have this or are we going to have that? What are the impacts of having one option as opposed to another? So the next phase of engagement will be even deeper than the one that we're having now. Yeah.
Is there any questions about that? Oh, sorry, just one behind you.
How many businesses got one of these acts?
So, okay, so the question was how many businesses received the survey. So the survey was available online. There was also over about 200 direct emails sent out, and
mailed.
Oh, mailed, hard copy.
Groups and organisations.
I might, yeah.
Thanks, Lisa.
Lisa McLeod, Manager of Community Planning, and I did a lot of the mail out and work, so I thought I might as well respond. So, Jim, your question was how did businesses get involved in this survey? And so, as Niamh just said, it was predominantly online, the promotion, and also advertising in the Standard. But we reached out to community groups and organisations through the Connect database. So that was 221 groups and organisations received emails and postal. For businesses themselves, we developed a list of 77 community leaders, the biggest employers and organisations in the community. They received 4 emails over the 12 weeks with all the details about how they could be involved. And we certainly did what we could to ensure that no one missed W2040 in the community with 15 active hubs and the big letters on the civic green, etc. So whilst there was, the business survey has just gone out, and that was a targeted piece to surveys.
How many businesses?
We didn't. 77 leading community organisations received a pack, were invited. From a business perspective, they were part of the broader community, and they may, I think, and Sean's here, I know it was promoted in the business support newsletter a number of times, which goes out fortnightly, I believe.
We sent it out on our economic development advisory email, which goes out to 800 different businesses, and we also took that out to our close group, and also a forum that was the International Business Environment Committee, which is as business attendance for our economic development.
Out of the returns, how many did you get?
We didn't ask people on the individual surveys whether they actually ran a business in Warrnambool, so I couldn't estimate how many of those represented.
You know, being the devil's advocate, businesses were really left out.
Businesses had the same opportunities as everybody else in the community. Yeah. Okay.
I'm saying that, you know, from my perspective, and the Moyne Shire, I mean, Warrnambool is very dependent on the Moyne Shire.
Okay, we might park that conversation for later. Happy to take it up later. The business support survey has just been completed, and watch the space as far as the reporting back on that.
You've got anything else to say?
Thank you very much for listening and for all of your questions, and very excited to come back again for phase 2.
Just from someone who's been working in community engagement for 20 years, I think you can be very proud of this process. And I used the word remarkable before. I don't use that lightly. I don't think I've ever used it, really about community engagement. But the levels of participation are a real testament to a strong community that they want to create a future together. So I just really wanted to leave it from, we're the independents in this process. We're not from Warrnambool. Neve's from Ballarat, I'm from Bendigo, I like dropping that in there. But we love Warrnambool now after working here for the last few years. But it's quite remarkable where you're at. So there's only great things for the rest of this engagement process and the community plan. So I just wanted to leave it.
We might call that a wrap. Look, thank you, Neve and Amy and Lisa, for this whole process. I think they've unpacked a fair bit. We've got a lot of unpacking to do. But for tonight, can you show again, please, your appreciation? I'm sure we're all really glad that we've had such a high and rich participation, and it's fantastic to hear from Amy that is in fact quite remarkable, and that's coming from an independent source, not from ourselves. It's fascinating to hear that we're quite unique in wanting to be welcoming and inclusive and connected, and that we want to grow but also keep our character and also respect highly our environment. There's so much to take out of this tonight, not only as a council but as a community, and I do think it's fantastic we're being told to be bold and unafraid. So thank you very much to everyone who's come this evening. Your participation and being here is so encouraging, and I think we can all look forward to further conversations about our future and actively look forward to phase 2. Thank you.